the day they assigned a human to guard Princess Sarevith Vane of the Elhari Dominion. The palace laughter could be heard from 3 courtyards away. It started, as most palace scandals did, with a mistake in the administrative office. Chamberlain Dorath had been processing the quarterly rotation of the Royal Protection Detail, an assignment so prestigious that families spent generations lobbying for a single slot. The RPD was composed exclusively of Elhari warriors, 7 feet tall on average, with exoskeletal ridge plates along their forearms and collarbones, bioluminescent threat markings that activated when combat approached, and reflexes so fast they could snatch arrows from midair without breaking their ceremonial stance. To be assigned to the RPD was to be counted among the finest soldiers in 12-star systems. To be assigned to Princess Sarevith specifically was a different thing entirely. Sarevith was the 4th child of Emperor Drevon Vane. She had no claim to the throne. She had no military titles. She spent her days in the library archives or the palace greenhouse, where she cultivated a frankly embarrassing collection of non-native vegetation from across the Dominion's occupied territories. She was, by all court measurements, the least important royal person in the building. Which was why, when Chamberlain Dorath processed the transfer request for 1 Sergeant Cale Morrow of the Terran Diplomatic Auxiliary Security Force, he placed it in the princess's detail file without a second thought. It wasn't malicious, exactly. It was simply how the hierarchy worked. The Emperor got Elhari veterans with 50 years of combat experience. The Crown Prince got the 2nd finest. The Empress Consort got the 3rd. And Princess Sarevith, who spent most of her time talking to plants and refusing to attend banquets, got whatever was left over. A human. The laughter began when Sergeant Morrow arrived at the palace gates, and the gate sentinels, 2 Elhari soldiers who had each personally survived planetary sieges, looked down at him and simply did not know what expression to make. He stood 5 feet 11 inches tall. He had no ridge plates. His threat markings were 0 because he had none. He carried a standard-issue Terran sidearm, a combat blade, and a small black pack that the gate scanner reported contained mostly protein rations, a medical kit, a folded thermal blanket, and something the scanner categorized only as asterisk, a small paper book, content, verses. Is this the security personnel transfer? The senior sentinel asked his partner in Elhari because the human probably didn't speak it. Apparently, said his partner. He looks like a juvenile. He looks like what they serve at the diplomatic receptions, the small ones, in the pastry cases. Someone put a pastry in a uniform and sent it to guard the princess. They waved him through, because what else could they do, and word spread through the palace faster than a fire in a fuel depot. Sergeant Cale Morrow, to his credit, did not seem to notice the laughter. He reported to the RPD Coordination Office, signed the necessary transfers, and asked in perfectly serviceable Elhari, which he apparently did speak, where Princess Sarevith's quarters were located and what her daily schedule looked like. The coordination officer, a mid-rank soldier named Teveles, handed him the schedule printout with the same energy one might use to hand someone a dessert menu at a funeral. Her Highness, Teveles said carefully, does not require intensive protection. Her assignments are typically ceremonial. Understood, said Morrow. He looked at the schedule. She goes to the greenhouse every morning at dawn. Yes. Alone. She prefers it. That ends today, said Morrow, not unkindly, and Teveles blinked at him. I'll be present. I'll stay back. She won't see me unless she wants to, but I'll be there. The previous guards had different risk assessments than I do, said Morrow. Thank you for the briefing. He left, and Teveles sat back in her chair and thought that this was going to be a very short assignment. Princess Sarevith first became aware of her new guard the way one becomes aware of a change in atmospheric pressure, not through a specific event, but through a shift in the texture of the air. She went to the greenhouse at dawn as always, moving through the eastern corridor in her work clothes, her long silver hair pinned back, carrying the small leather case that held her grafting tools. The guards on the corridor, her actual asterisk guards, the ceremonial pair who stood at her door and walked her to official functions, were nowhere to be seen. She hadn't requested an escort. The greenhouse was a glass and steel structure built into the palace's south-facing wall, 3 levels tall, warm year-round by design. She unlocked it herself, the biometric panel reading her palm, and stepped into the humid green air she loved better than almost anything in the palace. She was checking the moisture levels on a Terran oak sapling, a gift from the diplomatic delegation 2 years ago, still alive against considerable odds, when she heard a quiet sound outside the third glass panel to her left. Not approaching, not moving, just present. She looked up. Through the glass, half hidden by the exterior column, stood a figure in dark formal attire rather than the full ceremonial plate of the RPD. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the courtyard approaches, all 3 entry angles simultaneously, it seemed, because his gaze moved in a slow, precise pattern that she recognized after a moment as a trained scan. Small by Elhari standards, extraordinarily small, no ridge plates, human. She watched him for a moment. He didn't look at her, didn't perform awareness of her, just kept his slow, systematic watch on the courtyard and the 2 external corridors and the roof line above. After a few minutes, she went back to her oak sapling. She didn't say anything that morning, but the next morning she brought 2 cups of something hot when she came in, and she left one outside the third panel without a word. When she came back out an hour later, the cup was empty. It was back in exactly the same place she'd left it, not moved, not carried away, just empty. She picked it up. He was 20 feet down the colonnade, still watching the approaches. "You drink tea?" she asked in Elhari. "I drink anything that's hot, Your Highness," he said in Elhari without turning around. "In English, we say it's bad manners to talk to someone without looking at them," she said. Now he looked at her. He had dark eyes, a careful face, and the specific quality of stillness that she had only ever seen in very old Elhari soldiers, the kind who had survived enough that they'd stopped burning energy on unnecessary movement. "In security protocol," he said, also in English, because apparently he'd heard her switch, "we say it's bad manners to take your eyes off the threat vectors when there's someone you're protecting in the room." She looked at the empty courtyard. The morning mist was still burning off. A small ornamental bird was investigating the fountain. "There are no threat vectors," she said. "Not currently visible ones," he said. "That's different from none." She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. Neither of them was performing anything for the other, and it was, she realized, the most honest interaction she'd had in months. "Saravith," she said, "my name." "I know," he said. "I've read all of the publicly available material on you, Your Highness." "Kale Morrow," she said. "I've read your asterisk file." Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprise, but a recalibration. "All of it." "Your Dominion intake file is short," she said. "Your Terran service record is significantly longer. I had to apply for archival access. The siege of Callaway Station is particularly interesting." A long pause. The morning bird had found something in the fountain and was now absolutely triumphant about it. "I'll be here at dawn tomorrow," he said, "if that's acceptable." "Bring your own cup," she said. "I'm not a catering service." She went back inside. Behind her, she thought she heard something that might have been a quiet exhale that sounded, possibly, like a suppressed laugh. Part 2, The Shape of a Threat. The court's amusement at Princess Saravith's human guard lasted approximately 3 weeks, at which point it became something more like puzzled irritation, and then, slowly, something harder to name. It began to shift on the 14th day. during what should have been a routine courier reception in the East Wing. Sarevith had been asked to receive a trade delegation from the Voreth Principality, not because she had any authority to negotiate, but because her eldest brother was indisposed, her sister was off-system, and someone had to hand over the ceremonial acknowledgement papers without insulting the delegation's status. She was the available royal. She was always the available royal. Morrow accompanied her in plain attire, 3 steps behind and 1 to the right. The delegation's own guards were Voreth soldiers, 8 of them, 2 meters tall, insectoid joint structure, carapace armor, and they looked at Morrow with the same mild bafflement everyone always did. The reception itself was uneventful, papers exchanged, pleasantries extended. The delegation's chief representative, Ambassador Orcs, was gracious and correct, and Sarevith managed the whole thing without incident. It was on the way back in the second inner corridor that something shifted. Morrow stopped. Not dramatically. He simply placed his hand on her arm gently, with clear warning rather than force, and said, very quietly, "Stop. Don't walk forward." She stopped. The corridor ahead was empty. 2 ceremonial Elhari guards at the far end, both at rigid attention, neither of them moving. The overhead lights were at their standard ceremonial setting. Everything looked exactly as it should. "What?" she started. "The guard on the left," Morrow said very softly. "He's been in the same stance for 11 minutes. I watched him on the approach. He hasn't shifted his weight once. His partner has shifted 4 times, normal maintenance micro-movements. He hasn't." She looked at the distant guard. "That's either he's extraordinarily disciplined, which is possible," Morrow said, "or his kinetic monitoring unit has been spoofed, and that's a holographic projection." "A holographic," she stopped, thought about it. "That's not the security systems would catch." "Unless someone has access codes," he said. "I want you to go back to the greenhouse. Don't argue, don't explain to anyone where you're going. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes or I'll send the palace alert code through your wristband. If you receive the alert code, you lock the greenhouse. You go to the subfloor panic room. You don't open it for anyone but the Emperor's personal cipher." She stared at him. He was watching the corridor with that careful, slow sweep attention. "You're serious," she said. "I'm always serious," he said. 20 minutes, please." She went. She didn't entirely believe him. It seemed like an elaborate hallucination, a human finding threats where there were none because their pattern recognition ran too hot, overtuned by a history of actually being smaller than everything else. But she went because something in his voice had the quality of absolute certainty, and absolute certainty in a person who was not performing it was hard to dismiss. She went. The corridor back to the greenhouse took 3 minutes at her usual pace. She walked it in slightly under 2, not running. She had too much dignity and too much practice at looking composed under pressure for that, but not stopping either. And she moved through 2 checkpoints and 2 internal gates, and 1 surprised ceremonial guard who asked if she needed escort, and she said no very clearly and kept walking. The greenhouse door, her palm on the panel, the warm green air. She stepped inside and locked the door behind her and stood with her back against it for exactly 10 seconds, breathing deliberately, and then she went to her workbench because standing still without purpose was the worst possible use of her hands right now. She was in the greenhouse, standing at her workbench with her hands wrapped around a warm cup and her eyes on the door, when the palace alert went up. Not her personal wristband, the full palace alert. Every alarm, every lockdown protocol, the deep resonant tone that meant active threat, all personnel to defensive positions. It took 6 minutes, then the all clear. She was still standing there when Morrow arrived, 23 minutes after he'd sent her away. She heard his step in the colonnade, distinctive. She had already begun to learn his footfall, the specific rhythm of it, and she turned to watch him come through the door. The slight unevenness in his breath was the first thing she noticed, because he was usually as quiet as still water. The cut above his left eyebrow was the second thing, already clotting but still bright, and the way he was holding his right arm slightly closer to his body than usual was the third. "What happened?" she said. "Two Voreth operatives in the corridor," he said. "The guard on the left was a projection. They had a 4-minute window to move through that section before the shift change would have caught the discrepancy. You were the target. The real guards are fine. They were rerouted by a false maintenance alert." She looked at him for a long moment. "You got that from watching someone stand still for 11 minutes, she said. "I got that from watching the weight distribution patterns of everyone in a building I wasn't yet familiar with," he said. "I've been doing it for 3 weeks. You learn what normal looks like." She set her cup down. Her hands, she noticed, were very steady. She found that interesting about herself. "Sit down," she said. "Your eye needs closing." "It's fine." "It's bleeding on my floor," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She got the medical kit from her grafting case. She kept one there, had for years, because plant work occasionally produced cuts. And she cleaned the wound above his eye with the specific care she gave to things that mattered, and he sat still and let her, and neither of them said anything for a while. "I'm the 4th child," she said finally. "No one would benefit from." "Succession politics are rarely about succession," he said. "They're about leverage, message sending, destabilization. Removing a member of the imperial family. Any member makes a statement, particularly one with a single guard that everyone in 3 systems has been laughing at." She absorbed this. "They thought you were decorative." "Most people do," he said without bitterness. "And the Voreth delegation, Ambassador Vorix. Probably not involved. This feels like internal intelligence, someone who knew the corridor schedule, the guard rotation, your route. The Voreth provide the plausible cover." She finished closing the cut, pressed the seal strip along the edge, and leaned back to look at it. Neat work. She was good with small, precise repairs. "You're not what they told me you were," she said. "What did they tell you I was?" "Nothing specifically. The Chamberlain sent me a note that said Terran Auxiliary Security, temporary assignment. The implication was that you were a placeholder." "I am in the official sense." "No," she said, "you're not." He looked at her. She looked back. Outside the greenhouse glass, the palace was returning to its normal rhythms. Alert over, crisis categorized, another quiet day in the Elhari Dominion. "I'm going to need access to the building schematics," he said. "I'll get you access," she said. "What else?" "The guest manifests for the last 3 delegations, the shift rotation logs, the internal maintenance record for the monitoring system." "Done," she said. "Anything else?" He thought for a moment. "Do you have more of that tea?" She got up and made more tea. Part 3, the weight of ridicule. Word traveled, as it always did in the palace. By the following morning, the official incident report had been filed. The 2 Voreth operatives were in secure containment, and Sergeant Kale Morrow of the Terran Diplomatic Auxiliary Security Force had been officially commended in a report that exactly 3 senior officials actually read. The other 300 people in the palace heard about it through means that official reports had never effectively competed with. The servants' network, the corridor whispers, the specific electric current of gossip that flows through any large institution where everyone is theoretically professional, and everyone is also irresistibly human, or the Elhari equivalent thereof. The story that traveled was not precisely accurate. No story that moves that fast through that many people ever is, but its essential shape held. The human guard, the ridiculous one, the decorative one they'd assigned to the princess who talked to plants, had spotted an assassination attempt that the building's entire professional security apparatus had missed, and had done so by watching someone stand still for 11 minutes. The court's response was complex. There was, first, a wave of embarrassment masquerading as skepticism. He'd been lucky, surely, been in the right place. A coincidence that a human had caught what should have been Elhari professional detection. The ridge-plated guards at the end of the corridor would have noticed eventually. The shift change would have caught it. The monitoring systems would have flagged the anomaly. There was also, underneath that, a quieter thing, the beginning of a recalibration. The soldiers who had made the pastry jokes stopped making them, not because someone told them to, but because there is a specific moment in the career of any honest military professional when you encounter something you didn't expect to be dangerous, and you update your models accordingly. Among the people who updated their assessments was Teveles, the coordination officer who had handed Morrow his schedule printout on the first day, with the energy of someone offering a menu at a funeral. She encountered him 3 days after the corridor incident in the security integration office, where he had come to file his incident documentation in person, because he preferred to speak to the records archivists directly when he had questions about historical anomaly patterns. "Sergeant," she said. "Teveles," he said. A pause. In the Elhari military culture, there were protocols for acknowledging that you had been wrong about something, and most of them were elaborate and formal, and designed to preserve everyone's dignity across a significant power differential. But Morrow was not Elhari, and Teveles, looking at him in the corridor, found that the elaborate protocols felt inadequate for the specific texture of what she was trying to communicate. "I read your preliminary flag," she said, "TDA 7741, the one filed 6 weeks ago." "The one in the low-priority queue," he said. "Yes," she paused. "It was clear, the analysis was clear. I should have," she stopped, started again. "I should have read it properly when it came in." Morrow looked at her for a moment. His expression was, as usual, precise and non-performative. "The system routed it to you as low priority," he said. "That's a structural problem. You weren't wrong to trust the routing." "I was wrong," she said, "to assume the source couldn't tell the difference between low and high priority." He absorbed this. Then, with the specificity she was coming to understand was simply how he operated. "For the next review cycle, can you flag me as a Category 2 source? It means my subsequent reports route directly to the senior analyst desk." "I've already done it," she said. They looked at each other. Then she went back to her desk and he went to find the records archivist, and neither of them said anything else about it, and that was the end of that. Morrow noticed none of this, or seemed not to. He continued his slow, systematic watches. He continued his precise weight distribution scanning of everyone who moved through Saravith spaces. He ate his protein rations at the outer colonnade, and drank whatever hot liquid was available, and read his small paper book in the off-hours, and asked questions, precise, specific questions, of whoever had information about building layouts or guard rotations or historical incidents in the wings he was still learning. What nobody expected was that he asked those questions primarily of Saravith. Not because she was convenient, though she was, but because, as he explained once without particular ceremony, she was the most accurate source of information about patterns in the building. "You've lived here for 30 years, he said one morning, while she was tending to a series of seedlings from a contested border world that she'd been slowly coaxing back to health. "You know the rhythms of this place better than anyone else in it. What changes when it changes, who notices?" "I'm not a security analyst," she said. "No," he agreed. "You're a pattern observer who has never had a reason to weaponize the patterns. I'm going to ask you to start noticing them differently." She looked up at him. "You want me to learn security thinking?" "I want you to keep doing what you already do," he said. "I just want you to tell me what you notice." The conversation that followed was not what she expected. She had assumed he would ask her to report anomalies, in the way that official security briefings asked witnesses to report anomalies. With forms, with structured prompts, with a specific taxonomy of categories. She had assumed there would be something bureaucratic about it, because, in her experience, everything that touched the official apparatus eventually became bureaucratic. Instead, he said, "Tell me about the South Wing servants." She looked at him specifically. "Whatever comes to mind first," he said. "The head of housekeeping in the South Wing has been in the same position for 22 years, she said. "Her name is Yaveth. She has 3 children, all in service in different parts of the palace. She changes the floral arrangements every 9 days on a rotation she developed herself, and she's particularly attached to the 3rd-floor landing display, because she planted the original arrangement as a young apprentice." "And has anything about Yaveth changed recently?" Sarevith paused, thought back. "She's been using a different route to the East Supply Depot for the last 6 weeks, maybe, going around the maintenance corridor rather than through it. I noticed because the timing changed." "The maintenance corridor," Morrow said, "where the monitoring disruption I flagged originates from." A silence. "She's avoiding it," Sarevith said. "She noticed something," Morrow said. "Not necessarily consciously, but her instincts are telling her to root around that space. I'd like to speak with her." "You want to interview a head housekeeper about her flower roots?" "I want to ask her what she's noticed," he said. "Respectfully, unofficially, the way you'd ask a colleague." "She's not going to tell a security officer anything useful," Sarevith said. "She'll tell me," he said, "if you come with me." She looked at him. "You want me to vouch for you?" "You have 30 years of relationships in this building," he said. "I have 3 weeks. I'm operating at a significant relationship deficit." Sarevith thought about this. Then she set down her grafting tool and said, "Tomorrow morning, before the greenhouse, I know where Yaveth does her first walkthrough." "Thank you," he said. The conversation with Yaveth produced, eventually, 3 specific observations about changes in the maintenance corridor in the past 2 months. A new access panel cover that was slightly misaligned, a ventilation unit that had gone quieter than usual, and a smell she described as not right, not chemical but not right, that she'd first noticed in early autumn and then stopped noticing, which meant it had dissipated or been removed. All 3 went into Morrow's threat landscape file. All 3, eventually, contributed to the incident report. This turned out to be surprisingly productive. Sarevith had spent 30 years being overlooked in her own home, which meant she had also spent 30 years watching. She knew which servants changed their routes without reason. She knew which officials smiled at her more warmly than usual before a vote. She knew the acoustic properties of the East Wing so well that she could hear a whispered conversation from the 2nd-floor landing. She told him these things over the course of weeks, and he listened with the specific quality of attention that she had come to recognize as his particular gift: total, non-performative, organized. He asked clarifying questions. He cross-referenced against the shift logs and the building schematics. He built something she couldn't fully see but could feel taking shape around her, a structure of understanding. "You're making a map," she said one evening. They were in the small anteroom adjacent to the archive, where she had legitimate research access. He had accompanied her as always, and was reviewing the maintenance logs on a tablet while she cross-referenced botanical trade records from the 7th expansion. "A threat landscape," he said. "Yes, of this building, the people in it, and the patterns that have shifted in the last 18 months. And what does your threat landscape tell you?" He looked up. In the archive light, his face was serious in its usual way, not grim, not heavy, just precise. "It tells me that the corridor incident was not the first attempt," he said. "It was the most visible one. But there have been 3 other pattern disruptions in the 6 months before I arrived that align with access testing behaviors." She set down her research tablet. "You're saying someone has been preparing." "I'm saying someone has been patient," he said, "which is a different kind of dangerous." She thought about that. "My family's response to the corridor incident, was to increase the ceremonial RPD presence at official functions. Yes, which is visible and loud, and does nothing for the places I go quietly. Yes, like the greenhouse, she said. Like everywhere you go that isn't an official function, he said. Your family's security model is built around protecting assets that matter to the throne. High-profile targets, high-profile locations. It's a reasonable model. But it doesn't cover me. You weren't considered a target, he said, until now. She absorbed this. Outside the archive window, the palace lights were coming up to evening mode, warm and ceremonial, and the distant sounds of a formal dinner in the main hall floated through the walls. Her family would be there. Her brother at the head of the table, her sister just returned from her off-system posting, her parents in their formal places, the full ceremonial weight of the Elhari Dominion assembled in the dining hall 200 meters away. And she was here, in the archive anteroom, with her botanical research files and a cup of cold tea, and a human guard, who had apparently been the only person in the entire Dominion military apparatus paying attention to her for months before she'd even known she needed it. She thought about what it meant to be patient. She had always assumed patience was a passive thing, the absence of urgency, the decision to wait. But the patience Morrow was describing was something else. Active, architectural, the kind of patience that was itself a form of preparation. Someone had decided she was worth the investment of that patience, and that decision said something about her that no one in her family's court had bothered to calculate. It was, she thought, almost a compliment, in the most deeply disturbing possible way. "Why did they assign you here?" she asked. Truthfully, not the administrative reason. He looked at her for a moment. Myko thought it was a lateral move that wouldn't waste my skills on nothing, but also wouldn't put me in a position that required Elhari standard combat capability, he said. A consolation posting. Something like that. And yet here you are, she said. And yet here I am. She picked her research tablet back up. Good, she said. I'm glad they underestimated both of us. Something shifted in his face, the subtle version of what she'd been learning to read over weeks of close proximity. Warmth, precise and contained. The kind of warmth that doesn't broadcast itself because it doesn't need to. So am I, he said, and went back to the maintenance logs. Part 4, the night of the 3 moons. The assassination attempt, the real one, not the access testing, came on the night of the 3 moons convergence, which is exactly the kind of night, Morrow would say afterward, that professional threat actors choose because the ceremonial significance pulls all the attention toward the spectacle. The 3 moons convergence happened once every 17 years. All 3 of the Elhari homeworld's natural satellites aligned in a configuration that had been sacred in the pre-Empire era and was now celebrated with a full palace ceremony, a diplomatic reception, and fireworks that began at the 11th hour and ran until dawn. The entire court was present. The emperor and empress held court on the ceremonial balcony. The crown prince gave a speech that had been written by committee. Every guard, every official, every servant of rank was in formal attire and formal position. Sarevith was in her greenhouse. She had technically been expected at the ceremony. She had technically been informed 3 weeks in advance. She had also technically forgotten until that afternoon, and by then the thought of standing in ceremonial dress for 4 hours watching her family perform their roles felt so exhausting that she had simply not gone. This had happened before. Her absence from the convergence ceremony would be noted minimally, and she would receive a mild reprimand from the Chamberlain's office, and that would be the extent of the consequences. She was the 4th child. The bar for consequences was proportional to relevance. Morrow had not argued with her about the ceremony. He had, however, moved his position from the outer colonnade to inside the greenhouse once she told him she was staying in. You never come inside, she said. The sight lines from outside are inadequate for a building this crowded, he said. On standard evenings it's acceptable. Tonight it isn't. The fireworks are tonight, she said. Everyone will be watching the sky. Yes, he said, that's why it isn't. She'd looked at him for a moment, then gone back to her work, and he'd taken up a position at the interior side of the main entrance that gave him clear sight lines on all three greenhouse panels and the door simultaneously. She had worked in silence for a while, her hands in the soil, her attention on the root system of one of the border world seedlings that had been struggling since the last atmospheric cycle adjustment. It was alive, barely, stubbornly, like something that hadn't gotten the message that its conditions were unsuitable, and she was trying to understand why it had survived when its neighbors hadn't. The answer, she suspected, was soil chemistry, something specific in the trace mineral composition she'd added experimentally 3 months ago. She made a note. She would have to replicate the composition across the others. Behind her, Morrow was quiet. He was always quiet, but this was a different quality of quiet, not the ambient quiet of someone comfortable in their environment, but the active silence of someone listening very carefully to a great deal of information at once. Is there anything I should be doing? She asked, without turning around. What you're doing, he said. Sitting on the floor, repotting a struggling plant. Yes, he said, looking exactly like someone who forgot about the ceremony and is spending an unremarkable evening in her greenhouse. Anything else would alter the pattern. She looked at the seedling in her hands. It was, she thought, a reasonable metaphor for something, though she wasn't sure what. 2 hours into the ceremony, when the first fireworks were beginning their low preliminary arcs over the palace, Morrow moved. Not dramatically. He simply walked to the secondary panel, the one on the west side that had a view of the maintenance corridor, and stood very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, behind the workbench, now. She had been learning to respond to that voice without processing the instruction consciously. She moved behind the heavy stone workbench, old, solid, built by the first palace gardeners 2 centuries ago, and crouched. What happened next was not something she could reconstruct clearly afterward. She heard the maintenance panel open, a soft mechanical sound, quiet against the fireworks beginning to build outside. She heard something that was not quite silence, but was the particular controlled non-sound of multiple people moving with training. She heard Morrow say, in Elhari, very clearly and without any particular urgency, I know you have 4 people, the 2 in the passage and the 2 coming through the service roof. I also know that you've already disabled the external monitoring on this building. This means you are planning to take your time, which means you're not here to be fast and clean, which means you have instructions. Tell me what they are, and this ends differently than it would otherwise. A pause. Then a voice she didn't recognize, also in Elhari. You're one human with a sidearm. Yes, said Morrow. You'd think that would make this easier for you. I've noticed it usually doesn't. What she heard after that was not a fight exactly. A fight implied roughly equal participants engaging with roughly equal tools. What she heard was more like a very fast, very specific sequence of events, each one apparently inevitable to whoever had planned them, and the sound of that was not like the combat she'd seen in ceremonial demonstrations. It was quieter. It was stranger. It lasted 43 seconds, which she tracked precisely because she was counting, because she needed something to do with her mind, and counting was better than the alternative. 43 seconds. Then silence. Then you can come out, Your Highness. She came out from behind the workbench. There were 4 of them on the greenhouse floor. She looked at them for a long, quiet moment. Not dead, she could see the rise and fall of breathing, the specific quality of unconsciousness that was different from the stillness of death, and she was relieved by this in a way that surprised her with its intensity, because she had not known exactly how she would feel about dead people among her plants, and now she knew she would have felt very bad about it. They were immobilized with a thoroughness that looked like they would be very sore for a long time, and medical restraints from the Black Pack had been applied with speed that suggested Morrow had done this not once before but many times. She looked at her plants. Her oak sapling was undisturbed. Her border-world seedlings were in their neat row, the struggling one still in her half-finished work, the soil she'd been mixing still on the bench. The warm, humid air was exactly what it had been 3 hours ago. A greenhouse, at its core, was a controlled environment, the right conditions maintained deliberately against the outside world, and hers had held. Morrow was standing near the maintenance panel. His formal attire was minimally disrupted in a way that, she was realizing, told its own story. The precision of the damage. The tear on his left sleeve where something had caught it was surgical in its placement, defensive block, she guessed, which meant whatever had come at him from that angle had not gotten further. She could see from the way he was holding his right arm that something had impacted it during the 43 seconds, but he was upright, and his expression was its usual precise quality, and he was already on the comms, reporting to Palace Security in Clipped El-Hari. She stood in the middle of her greenhouse, among her plants, with 4 assassins zip-tied to her floor and looked at him. He finished the comm, looked over at her, and read her expression with the specific accuracy he developed over months of close proximity. "I'm all right," he said. "The arm is bruised, not broken. I've had worse." "I know you have," she said, thinking of Callaway Station. "Is it over?" "For tonight," he said. "There's a 5th outside. Palace Security will collect them." "This cell is done." He paused. "Are you all right?" She looked at her plants. Her oak sapling was undisturbed. Her border-world seedlings were in their neat row. The warm, humid air was exactly what it had been an hour ago. "Yes," she said. She turned back to him. You knew they were planning tonight." "I suspected tonight was a high-risk window," he said. "The monitoring disruption I'd identified in the last pattern review was timed to the convergence ceremony. It was either tonight or not for another 3 months." "You didn't tell me." "I told you that the greenhouse sight lines were inadequate for a crowded night," he said. "I said tonight was different." "That's not," she stopped. "You didn't want me to be frightened." He looked at her steadily. "I wanted you to be inside a solid stone building with me instead of on a ceremonial balcony with 4,000 people," he said. "The means of achieving that mattered less than the result." A brief pause. "I should have been more direct with you about the risk assessment. I'll do that differently going forward." She absorbed the acknowledgement, the clean, undramatic admission, and the immediate forward correction. No performance of guilt, no excessive apology, just the adjustment stated plainly. She had met very few people in her life who could do that. Outside, the fireworks were building toward their ceremonial peak. The 3 moons' convergence colors, gold and silver and deep violet, reflected on the greenhouse glass. Spectacular and enormous and very far away from where she was standing. Her family would be watching that sky right now, tilting their faces up to the manufactured grandeur of the convergence, the whole court assembled in formal splendor. And here in the greenhouse, on the south wall, she was standing in her work clothes with soil on her hands, and 4 people zip-tied to her floor and a human guard who had just prevented her assassination for the 2nd time in 3 months. She thought about the gap between what the ceremony was and what was actually true. The gap had always existed. She had always lived in it. She had just never had anyone to share it with before. "What is the word?" she said slowly, in English. "For the thing where someone is so committed to keeping you safe that they plan 3 steps ahead of every threat and still don't make it feel like you're being managed. Like you're a person they've decided matters, rather than an assignment they're completing." Morrow looked at her. The fireworks painted light across the greenhouse in long, slow waves, gold first, then silver, then the deep violet of the 3rd moon's color. "I'm not sure there's a single word," he said. There should be, she said. Somewhere in the palace, the crowd made the sound that crowds make at something beautiful. Neither of them was watching the sky. Part 5. What the court learned. The aftermath was, by palace standards, substantial. The cell was traced to a dissident faction within the Dominion's own administrative apparatus. Not Vorath, not external, but internal. People who had calculated, with some mathematical elegance, that a destabilization event targeting a minor royal would carry significant symbolic weight and minimal security reprisal, because who would seriously protect the fourth child? The answer, it turned out, was a single Terran sergeant with a pattern recognition architecture that made Elhari threat assessment protocols look like they'd been designed by people who had never been smaller than everyone else in the room. Which broadly they had been. This was the conversation that happened in the Emperor's private council the day after the convergence, which Sarevith attended, for the first time, uninvited but unchallenged, because she had decided that her opinions had become relevant whether the council agreed or not. The security failure, said the senior RPD commander, whose name was Varath and who had fought in 3 campaigns and whose ridge plates had 7 battle marks, was a monitoring system vulnerability that should have been caught in the quarterly audit. The monitoring system vulnerability, said Sarevith, was caught by Sergeant Morrow 6 weeks ago. The room looked at her. He filed a preliminary flag with the Security Integration Office, she said. Reference number TDA 7741. It was categorized as a routine anomaly report and placed in the low-priority review queue. It was still in that queue last night when 4 assassins came through my maintenance panel. A silence. I was not aware, said Varath. No, said Sarevith. You weren't. Neither was I until I asked him this morning to walk me through his threat assessment record. The Emperor, her father, whom she loved but also feared in the distant, polite way of children who grow up understanding that love and power occupy different rooms, looked at her from the head of the table. His expression was doing something she hadn't seen it do before. And where is Sergeant Morrow now? He asked. Outside this room, she said. He doesn't go far. Another silence. Bring him in, the Emperor said. She went to the door herself, which was not protocol, and opened it, and found Morrow exactly where she expected, 3 feet from the entrance, covering the approach corridor and the secondary access point simultaneously while appearing to be simply standing still. My father wants to speak with you, she said. He came in. He stood in front of the Emperor's council table and looked like what he was, a person of unremarkable physical dimensions surrounded by the most physically impressive military figures in the Elhari Dominion, none of whom were looking at him with amusement anymore. Sergeant Morrow, the Emperor said, I understand you submitted a security flag 6 weeks ago. I submitted 3, said Morrow. Flags 2 and 3 were more specific. They outlined the probable target window, the monitoring disruption pattern, and the likely access route. The room was very quiet. We owe you an apology, the Emperor said, which was not a thing the Emperor said often, or at all by most accounts. You owe your daughter a better security apparatus, Morrow said. I'm a sergeant on a temporary assignment. The underlying gaps in your threat assessment system exist regardless of whether I'm here to notice them. Sarevith, watching from her position near the door, saw several things happen simultaneously on the faces of the council members. She filed all of them away. What would you recommend? The Emperor asked. Morrow told him. It took 11 minutes, precise and specific, with references to the monitoring integration report, the quarterly audit timeline, and a structural recommendation for how low-priority flag processing should be restructured. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody asked if he was sure. At some point, the senior RPD commander picked up a stylus and began taking notes. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. I'd like to offer you a permanent position, the emperor said. Not temporary, not auxiliary, full integration into palace security at a rank commensurate with. I appreciate the offer, Morrow said. I'll accept the position if it includes my current assignment. The emperor looked at Sareveth. She looked back at her father with an expression that said something they had never quite said to each other before. That can be arranged, the emperor said. Part 6. What Seravth chose. The thing about being overlooked, Sareveth had always thought, was that it gave you choices other people didn't have. When nobody was watching, you could become whatever you needed to become without the weight of expectation reshaping the process. You could learn, grow, change your mind, decide that the life you'd been assigned was not the life you were going to live. She was thinking about this 3 weeks after the council meeting, in the greenhouse at dawn, with her grafting tools and her oak sapling, and a second cup of tea on the outer sill for a specific recipient. The Border World Initiative, she said. I've been thinking about it. Morrow, outside the third panel in his usual morning position, said, Tell me. The contested territories produce a significant portion of the Dominion's botanical resources, she said. Medicinal plants, fiber crops, food staples. The communities there have no formal representation in Dominion governance and significant ongoing disputes with resource extraction operations. I know, he said. I read your background files, all of them this time. She looked up, all of them. You've been publishing botanical surveys of contested territories for 11 years, he said. Each one includes detailed notes on local cultivation practices, community relationships with specific plant species, economic patterns. They are very obviously not purely botanical. She was quiet for a moment. Nobody reads them. I read them, he said. They're very good. She went back to her sapling, which was, she was pleased to note, showing 3 new leaves. Terran oak saplings had no business being alive in the Elhari homeworld environment. This one had been alive for 2 years through what she could only call determination and a very personalized care regimen. I want to go to the territories, she said, formally, as a representative of the imperial household, to convene community consultations about the resource extraction agreements. A pause. That's not a small thing, he said. No, she agreed. It's not. I've been building toward it for 11 years. The surveys were always the first part of a larger argument. I wanted to understand the situation completely before I tried to change it. I think I understand it now. And the consultation mechanism. I've been working with a legal advocate in the Imperial Administrative Offices, a person named Seath, who has been waiting for a member of the imperial family to sponsor a formal representation initiative for the last 8 years. She has the framework ready. We've been corresponding for 6 months. He was quiet for a moment. She had, she knew, just revealed the extent of how long this had been planned, the evidence that her quiet life in the greenhouse and the archive was not simply a retreat from the world she found exhausting, but a preparation for something specific. You've been building something, he said. Same as you, she said, different materials. That would make you a political target. I'm already a political target, she said. I'd rather be one for a reason that does something useful. Being a target for simply existing is, I find I object to it significantly less when the target is attached to something I'm actually trying to accomplish. She heard him shift position, the particular movement that meant he was recalculating a security scenario. She'd learned to read his movements the way she'd learned to read the weight distribution patterns of plants under stress, through close attention over time. They had been in each other's company every day for 7 months now, and she knew his stillness as well as she knew the stillness of her greenhouse before a difficult weather system came in. It's possible, he said finally. With proper advance work, I'd need 6 weeks to assess the sites, and I'd need to build a mission-specific security protocol rather than adapting the standard diplomatic escort model. I assumed that, she said, whatever you need. I know, she said. I was going to ask you to start. You were going to ask me before you told me your plan. I was going to tell you my plan at breakfast, she said. This is pre-breakfast reconnaissance. She heard the suppressed sound again, the one she'd decided was a laugh he'd trained most of himself not to make, and which emerged anyway sometimes when she said something that caught him in the right way. She had become, she realized, very attached to that sound. She had stopped, several months ago, pretending to herself that this was simply professional familiarity. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. At Callaway Station, she said, your unit was pinned for 11 days. They were asking for extraction and the extraction didn't come, and your unit held the station anyway. A long pause. That's public record, he said. The part that's not public record, she said, is that you were the one who organized the civilian evacuation while the military command was still arguing about perimeter defense. 311 people, 11 days, no extraction, active bombardment. You got them out. The morning was very still. The ornamental bird was back at the fountain. Someone had to, he said. Yes, she said, but it was you. She set down her grafting tool and looked out at him through the glass. He was watching the courtyard approaches with his slow, precise scan. That's why they sent you here, she said, not because they thought it was a lateral move. Because you're the person who sees what needs doing and does it when no one else is paying attention. He turned and looked at her through the glass. Full attention, both of them, no one performing anything for anyone else. Maybe, he said. Definitely, she said. I've read your file. She picked up her grafting tool again. He turned back to the courtyard, and there was something in the set of his shoulders that she had learned to read as a form of contentment. Not happiness exactly, which was a loud thing, but the quieter state of being exactly where you should be. 6 weeks, he said, for the site assessments. I know, she said. I'll start the formal request from my end today. Your father isn't going to like it. My father just restructured his entire palace security apparatus based on a report filed by a Terran sergeant he'd previously categorized as decorative, she said. I think he's currently in a phase of reconsidering his assumptions. A pause, that's fair. The morning light was coming up properly now, the greenhouse warming, her plants turning incrementally toward it the way they always did. She watched them, the oak, the border world seedlings, the diplomatic delegation's ornamental reed from 3 years ago that had somehow turned into a 7-foot structural presence in the corner, and felt something she recognized, eventually, as hope. Practical, specific, rooted hope, the kind that came with a plan. Morrow, she said. Yes. Thank you, she said, for paying attention. Another of those pauses that she'd learned contained more than silence. Thank you, he said, for the same. Part 7, What the Assassins Understood. 3 months later, when the Border World consultation mission had been formally approved and the planning was well underway, there was a final incident that became, in its own way, the one people remembered most. A second cell, unconnected to the first, a different faction with different motives but similar calculations about Princess Sarevith's security status, made an approach attempt at the spaceport during the mission's departure morning. There were 6 of them, well-trained, well-equipped. They had done their research on the Terran Guard and had, specifically, sourced weapons designed to neutralize the threat assessment advantages that had ended the first cell, because the first cell's failure had been publicly attributed to a security apparatus upgrade, and nobody had specifically named the human who'd driven it. They came in 3 pairs from 3 approaches, coordinated, timed. The Elhari RPD detachment, now post-council reform, deployed with actual security mandates, rather than purely ceremonial ones, intercepted the first pair. Morrow intercepted the other 4 simultaneously. This was the part that became a story told afterward in the security briefings, in the diplomatic channels, eventually in the third-party intelligence reports from 6 different political factions who all concluded the same thing, that the resource cost of targeting Princess Sarevith of the Elhari Dominion had been catastrophically miscalculated, because her guard was not, in any useful functional sense, human in the way the term had been understood. He was human, entirely, specifically, biologically human, 5 feet 11, no ridge plates, no bioluminescent threat markings, reflexes that were objectively slower than the Elhari soldiers beside him. He was also something else, which didn't have a word in Elhari and had several in English, but the most accurate one was probably *prepared. Prepared for every angle of approach. Prepared for weapons designed to neutralize his advantages. Prepared for the specific individuals involved, because he had spent 3 months building a threat landscape that included exactly these contingencies. Prepared in the way that someone becomes prepared when they have spent their whole professional life being underestimated, and have learned to make use of the gap between what people expect and what they actually find. The 6 went down in 4 minutes. And the word that went out through the intelligence channels, through the faction networks, through the cells and rings and dissident groups that had been watching Princess Sarevith of the Elhari Dominion as a potential pressure point, was not a long word. It was essentially, don't. Sarevith heard about this secondhand. She had been on the departure platform with the mission equipment when it happened, and by the time she became aware of the incident, it was over. She found Morrow doing post-incident documentation in the departure lounge, seated at a small table with his tablet and his black pack, looking precisely as he always looked. Careful, precise, unbothered. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No," he said. "The arm from 3 months ago." "Healed," he said. "I told you." She sat down across from him. The departure lounge was emptying as the mission crew boarded. Through the wide portside windows the ship was visible, her first real mission, her actual political work, the thing she'd been building toward for 11 years of botanical surveys nobody had read. "They came for me again," she said. "They came for the symbolic target," he said, "which happens to be you, yes. And they'll keep coming. For a while," he said, "the calculus changes when the cost becomes prohibitive." He paused. "It's becoming prohibitive." She looked at him across the small table. 3 months of mornings in the greenhouse, of shared intelligence assessments, of her learning to notice things differently, and him learning the specific idiom of her attention. 3 months of the quiet architecture he'd been building around her life, which felt nothing like a cage and everything like something she didn't quite have a word for yet. "In English," she said, "what do you call the thing where someone chooses to stay in a difficult position not because they have to, but because they've decided it's where they're supposed to be?" He looked at her. The departure announcement came through the speakers, formal and ceremonial. "I don't know," he said. "What do you call it in Elhari?" She thought about it. "Varathan," she said. "It means roughly where the weight settles, the place you carry that fits." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the boarding sequence was continuing. "Then that," he said. She stood. The mission was boarding. The border territories were waiting, with their communities and their contested resources, and their 11 years of botanical surveys she intended to finally make mean something. She put her hand on the table, close to where his was resting. "Come on then," she said. "We have a ship to catch." He put his tablet in his pack, stood, slung the pack over his shoulder, and walked beside her toward the gate. Not 3 steps behind, not ceremonially placed, beside her. The gate sentinels, different ones than the pair from 9 months ago, but with the same basic physical architecture and the same baseline assessment capacities. looked at the pair of them approaching and made a note in their logs. Princess Sarevith Vane, 4th Imperial, accompanied by personal security. Personal security. Human male, unranked appearance, standard issue equipment, no visible threat indicators. The senior sentinel's partner looked at the notation, then looked at the human walking beside the princess. The specific quality of his movement, the slow, precise scan he was running on the gate approach without appearing to, the exact positioning relative to the princess that created a coverage arc she couldn't have designed better herself. "He's done 2 perimeter reads since they came around the corner," she said quietly to her partner. "I know," said the senior sentinel. "The spaceport incident." "I read the report," said the senior sentinel. They looked at each other. Then, because training eventually catches up with reality, and because the best sentinels were the ones who could update their assessments without drama, the senior sentinel added a second notation to the log, unprompted, which was not standard form language but was accurate. "Recommend, full clearance, no delay, do not engage." They walked through without stopping. Behind the sentinel's post, the junior of the two, 3 years in service, still building the pattern vocabulary that took a decade to develop properly, watched the pair walk through toward the mission ship. "Why didn't we get assigned to that detail?" she asked. The senior sentinel considered the question. "Because we haven't been underestimated enough yet," she said finally. The junior sentinel thought about this for the rest of her shift and filed it away, and it was the beginning of something that would take her many years to fully articulate, but that she understood, in that moment, in its essential shape. That the gap between what people expected and what was actually true was not a problem to be solved, but a tool to be used, and that the best operators in any system were the ones who had learned to work with the grain of being overlooked rather than against it. She didn't say any of this out loud. She watched the ship begin its departure sequence, and the princess's greenhouse green coat visible through the portside window for a moment before the dock crew moved into position, and thought about what it meant to choose the weight that fits. The ship lifted. The gate returned to its standard operations. The Dominion went on being an empire, which it would continue to be for some time, though certain things about the shape of it had already begun, quietly, to change. End. Word count target, *9 900 words. Duration, *62 minutes at 160 WPM. Seed tone only. Pushkin 2024. Lone operative, systematic precision, institutional underestimation of quiet competence. Core HFY theme. Human strength through preparation, pattern recognition, and the ability to be underestimated. Romance arc. Slow burn mutual recognition, intellectual respect deepening into attachment. Setting, *** Elhari Dominion Imperial Palace, plus border mission.